you all to the University of Hartford's annual Human Rights Day celebration, co-sponsored by UIS and the university's Office of Diversity and Community Engagement. We are holding the event this year during Women's History Month, instead of in December when World Human Rights Day is typically celebrated. As many of you know, Women's History Month highlights the incredible accomplishments and contributions of women. The theme for our series this year is celebrating faces of strength, faces of courage, and faces of resilience. We have already held several very successful events earlier in the month. We have this one today and one more coming up on Monday, March 29th, called Overcoming Challenges, Strategies for Women's Resilience from 6:30 to 7:30. So for today's event, we are so excited to hear from local human rights activist, Adrienne Billings-Smith. Adrienne is a local attorney, flight attendant, and co-chair of the West Hartford Human Rights Commission. As a Black queer woman from the South, Adrienne has navigated racism and discrimination her entire life. She chose to leave Florida in hopes that New England would afford her family a better life culturally, financially, and politically. Unfortunately, she recognized that racism has no boundaries and realized she needed to speak up for her family and community. In the wake of police brutality and the numerous stories about inequity in education, she saw the need for a voice in her community and so started the Concerned Parents of Color of West Hartford to advocate for change in education, legislation, and representation. Her vision is to build and sustain an open, honest dialogue with leaders of the town, and most importantly, to hold the leadership accountable to its citizens of color. She believes that if a community acknowledges these injustices, it can move forward and defeat racism and its effects. As she states to anyone who will listen, I don't need you to move a mountain, but I need you to pick up a rock. Today, she'll be talking about the whiteness of human rights, queer women of color, and the horizon of humanity. So she will talk for about 20-25 minutes. And then we will have time for questions, which you may put into the Q&A box as she's talking if you want to, or wait until she's finished talking. And I will moderate, read the questions for her to answer to you. So we look forward to the event and thank you so much for tuning in today. Adrienne?
Good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you to the University of Hartford, the Office of Diversity and Community Engagement, and UIS, excuse me. And a huge thank you to Judy Kelly for allowing me to have this space to speak. I will be honest, this week has been triggering for a lot of us. This year, the last 4 years have been triggering for a lot of us. But this week in particular has forced me to reflect on my work and the work being done in multiple communities, but specifically my community. I like to tell people, and people like to tell me, activism is not for the weak. It's not something that came naturally to me. It's something that was needed, and I knew that I had a voice to do so. I want to bring in that I speak to my friend, my dear friend, Mike Keogh. He is the founder of I Am Not a Virus, a local Asian American individual who has brought so much awareness to things that have happened, not only this past week, but over the year and years in our communities. And we speak daily. We lean on each other, support each other. We've probably cried together multiple times, but we also laugh together and congratulate and celebrate the progress that has been made this year. But this week we both took a hit and admitted our exhaustion, our anger, and our thinning nerves, as we would say in the South. So what does this have to do with this particular talk? Human rights, women's rights, LGBTQI rights, honestly, everything. As you heard in my introduction, my life looks like it's been lived. At age 39, I've done a lot, and I'm really just getting started. But every piece of my journey has hit every emotional piece of the spectrum. Now, disclaimer, I am not an expert on human rights or LGBTQI rights. And most importantly, I don't speak for every Black person in the room or in the community or in the nation or in the world. I speak to you today strictly from my experiences and journey from childhood in the South to womanhood in the Northeast. Still trying to untangle the mess of life with hopes and aspirations of a better future for my children. So let's begin. What are human rights? According to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, human rights are the basic rights and freedoms that belong to everyone in the world from birth until death. Sounds good, right? And I think so. It sounds promising. But who actually benefits from these inherent rights? Take a moment and think. White, male, Christian, heterosexual. But the definition says it belongs to every person in the world. And I'm not here just to talk about the world today. I'm here to talk about our own nation, the United States of America, and how it has not lived up to the United Nations Charter it signed as a founder in 1945, nor the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was adopted shortly after. I am here because the work I believe in and am doing starts right here in our backyard. Because until we can rectify the wrongs of this nation, this region, and even more locally, this state, we will never be fully capable of promoting, supporting, and being true advocates of human rights or the movement toward a more equal and equitable world. In 1941, FDR coined the Four Freedoms. It was sort of a blueprint to what eventually would become the Articles of the Declaration. The four freedoms are freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Those freedoms all sound well and good if, again, you are white, heterosexual, Christian, and or male. But let's dig deep into why these four freedoms did not and still do not benefit women, people of color, or the LGBTQIA community, even if these rights are covered by law. According to a Forbes article released on January 7th of this year, 52 people were arrested after attacking the US Capitol, compared to the 427 individuals, including 24 juveniles, who were arrested on unrest-related charges during racial justice protests in the Capitol between May 30th and June 2nd of 2020. We don't need to parse out the differences because we already know from common sense and blatant racism that the majority of the people arrested because of the racial justice protests were people of color, mainly Black folks. We also watched a large number of white men bash windows, steal furniture, and desecrate artifacts right on national TV. And then we watched them be escorted out because of their insistence of freedom of speech through protesting. So who actually has freedom of speech? Not me. Freedom of worship. According to the Anti-Defamation League's 2019 annual report released in May of 2020, the report found that more than 2,100 acts of anti-Semitic hate, 56% increase in assaults, and 5 fatalities were in 2019. Further, it found there are over 1,100 harassment incidents, cases where one or more Jewish individuals reported feeling harassed by the anti-Semitic language or actions. Acts of harassment increased by 6% from 1,000 in 2018. There were 919 vandalism incidents, cases where property was damaged in a manner which harmed or intimidated Jewish individuals. Swastikas, which are generally interpreted as symbols of anti-Semitic hatred, were present in 746 of these incidents. Acts of anti-Semitic vandalism increased by 19% in 2018. There were 61 assaults, cases where individuals were physically targeted with violence, accompanied by evidence of anti-Semitic animus. Anti-Semitic assault increased 56% from 2018. 11 of the 61 assaults were with deadly weapons such as guns or knives. The 61 assault incidents harmed 95 victims, including 5 fatalities. So who actually gets the right to freely worship? Free from want. This one I didn't even write any statistics about, because what are we free from want? Want of equal access to education, equal access to wealth, equal access to healthcare, equal access to justice. We don't need statistics to know that we're not living up to that. And lastly, freedom from fear. This was written by FDR, the same president who put his citizens in internment camps in 1942 through Executive Order 9066. Military zones in California, Washington, Oregon, states with large populations of Japanese Americans. And Roosevelt's executive order commanded the relocation of Americans of Japanese ancestry. This affected the lives of over 100,000 individuals, the majority of them whom were American citizens. There are still citizens alive today speaking of this horrible moment in American history. And here we are again in 2021, dealing with people's human rights being attacked physically and verbally. Stop AAPI Hate, a West Coast-based collective, found that last spring, in response to the pandemic, reported 2,808 hate incidents nationwide aimed at Asian Americans from March through December of 2020. As I mentioned, this past week has once again reiterated that these freedoms were not written for all of us. This is where race and gender intersect. This is where freedom of fear has failed us. 6 Asian women gunned down by a white cis man who felt his rights were superior to theirs, to an entire community's rights. People living in fear, living in silence, because who can they trust? Asian American attacks are up 150% and disproportionately affect Asian women. I sit here as a Black woman, mourning for my Asian brothers and sisters, especially my sisters, because I feel their hurt and their pain, the sexualization, the fetishizing of women of color, the continued assault by strangers, families, and friends, and the continued dehumanization of women of color. It's heartbreaking and demoralizing. So again, who is actually free from fear? I bring all these points up, as I said, I want to keep it close to home, because when we look in our own mirror, we can start to recognize all the human rights violations here and begin to reconcile. I am no expert on human rights, like I said, nor an expert on Black or LGBTQI rights. All I have is the experience of my 40 years living in this Black skin, living as a woman, and being a member of the LGBTQI community for as long as I can remember. They all make the whole of me. I know for a fact FDR did not have me in mind when he spoke of these four freedoms, nor have most individuals who have spoken about human rights and who have actually benefited from those inherent rights. So I have stopped worrying about the four freedoms or the articles signed and resaid each year in my country. Why? Because as a Black queer woman, if I continue to wait on the permission of white people, I will die unhappy, disenchanted, resentful, and angry. As a Black queer woman, I have lived the majority of my life in fear. Fear of not being accepted, fear of being discriminated against, fear of being harmed physically and mentally, fear of being politically harmed because my rights are constantly in flux and used as political fodder. I am a walking, talking, living politic. Growing up at the South, I knew I was always second class compared to others. Not necessarily because of anything in particular at a particular moment in my life. There were just a plethora of things that happened. From being a called nigger at the age of 8 to having to basically beg to be in my AP history class. I had no clue what white supremacy was. Honestly, to me, white supremacy is a new term, kind of like equity. It's trendy, it gets people's attention, but white supremacy is a disease that lives and is passed down from generation to generation. It can be covert, overt, or through microaggressions. It lives in every crevice that we occupy. When I was a child, I loved my friends and teachers. I loved to learn. I was so naive because why wouldn't I be? Now, what is my favorite poem, because I actually understand it, by Langston Hughes, Life Ain't No Crystal Stair, a poem from a Black mother to her Black child about oppression, hope, inequity, and love. What a beautifully written piece of work. But every year as a child, for 3 years, I was called upon to read it. I would read it with so much drama, every word with no G, everything that was Black and stereotypical. I read it that way with pride. As my white teachers laughed at the cute, nappy headed little girl, I was proud when I read that poem because I thought it made me happy. Excuse me. I thought I was seen. I didn't realize I was a minstrel, a Blackface. Langston Hughes, a queer Black man, is one of the greatest poets and wordsmiths of all time. Writing during the Black Renaissance about the Black experience, God, I always look back in that moment and think, how could you do that to a child? Why tokenize us? And that's not even when I recognized I was Black or different. I'm sorry. Black people, and probably most people of color, have these moments during their lives that hit them like a lightning bolt when it comes to their identity. As I said, I'm a woman from the South. And there's probably plenty of rumors of how you're treated in the South if you're a person of color. My grandmother died when I was 6. And as we drove from Florida to Tennessee, we were pulled over going through a toll booth. How fast could you possibly be going through a toll booth? I remember my cousin sat at the wheel at 10 and 2. I heard her being berated for speeding. But the most that I saw was her cowering. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. At that moment, I realized the officer was the holder of power, and she relinquished hers as soon as she was approached by him. As a Black woman, I get it now. Your entire being is worthless when you are in the company of power. I don't single out white men because sometimes my greatest fear, since I recognize power dynamics, has been the power of the white woman, conservative or liberal. The privilege and power they hold is amazing, docile, yet ever changing, making moves when it benefits them, claiming allyship when it looks advantageous. Think back to the time of slavery. Never mind that. Think back to the time of Emmett Till. The words of that woman were like Helen of Troy. She began an entire movement. Her lies, the damsel in distress, killed an innocent boy. Now you ask, what does this have to do with me or human rights or women's rights or LGBTQI rights? Everything. Who do you trust when history tells you that at the snap of a finger, you don't matter or exist? That the cry of your supposed ally, your fellow sister, mother, best friend, wife can get you killed? Think about that. Human rights are for all of us, right? The right to live without fear, discrimination, torture. What is torture? Are we speaking of strictly physical torture? Because to be a Black queer woman is to literally live a tortured life. Moments of wanting to take your life, moments of seeing your life flash before your eyes, moments of literal torture. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. You see, I still have a smile on my face. I know what I've said is heavy, but you have to know that you have to know the heavy before you actually see the light at the end of the tunnel. I am privileged. I live a comfortable life financially. I have a wonderful family. I am an attorney. I am a flight attendant. I have been all over this world. If I wanted to ignore my traumas, I could. I could bury them and never look back. But my traumas are who I am. They are the reason I strive for equity, equality, acknowledgement, progress toward a better world for all of us. I do not always go high, but I do my best to have more solutions than problems. And is why the title of this discussion speaks to the power of being a Black queer woman. These unique identities put me at the center of intersectionality. I now have the ability to demand for my voice to be heard because my voice speaks to so many social and political issues. My voice speaks to and for so many communities. My trauma and my privilege can coexist, and that's what I have to remember. When I started my organization, honestly, it was out of pure rage and anger. I was pissed at the world. I ranted and raged at the system. I cried myself to pure exhaustion. And one day I said, no, not anymore. What is going on in my town? What do these people really believe? What is my leadership doing to live up to those four freedoms? Maybe in the 40s or the 60s, 80s, or even the 2000s, they weren't meant for me. but I was damn sure someone was going to hear my voice and fight for my human rights. So I started a group called Concerned Parents of Color of West Hartford. I was trying to provide a space for parents of color, a space that centered around them and their mental health, their hopes and fears. I wanted them to know, hey, there is someone out here wanting to fight for you, someone who demands that leadership live up to their promises. Stop tokenizing us, utilize us. As I said, I have not always been an activist, and activism is not monolithic. We each need to find our own lane in this movement. For example, in my own community, it has a very complicated history, a history of slavery, a history of restricted covenants, a history of redlining, a lack of affordable housing, and the list goes on. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my life in West Hartford. I really do. But that doesn't mean the place or people I love can't be held accountable and progress shouldn't happen just because the emotional attachment I have to it. In fact, to hold my town leadership and neighbors accountable, it is truly to have love for my community. As I said, I started my organization out of emotional exhaustion, screaming into a black hole, preaching to the choir. So I made my own lane. Use your voice, go to the people who control the narrative, and dare and demand them to change it. I wrote a letter demanding just that. The status quo is not good enough. Roaming around acting ignorant to things flying past your head is unacceptable. This to me goes back to those four freedoms. When you believe in those four freedoms, you live as if you are protected by them. That's the privilege. That's the whiteness of it all. I had a meeting recently where we spoke about a vision for our youth, and the word perseverance was used. I immediately cringed. What does that word mean? Continuing to overcome adversity in hopes that you will be awarded with something positive or hopefully tangible like access to wealth, education, healthcare. But for me, that word just resonates differently as a queer Black woman. I thought, my God, the word of survival comes to mind. People who live on the fringes of whiteness are typically trying to survive in hopes of positive happening, like the ability to move freely in this world, free from discrimination, sexism, racism. Imagine those two mindsets. What do you think about when you think about persevering? Marginalized people would love to only think about their hard work being rewarded with wealth, promotion, and even a damn pat on the back. But when you have the added layer of conscious or unconscious oppression, we don't get to use and see that word the same way. So when we think about human rights, we have to get away from the white lens of human rights. We have to dig deeper than the Declaration. We have to look not at what is happening on other continents, but right here at home. Start defining those terms in the Declaration based on what you see happening around you. Just take the few articles and ask yourself, are we as a nation living up to this? Are you as an individual or ally living up to this? Whose standards are we living up to? How do we do this equitably? When I read this, when I read these articles, do I feel safe and seen? Why? Do you intentionally parse out who deserve these rights? I'll read them and allow you to take a moment and ask yourself those questions. Draw a picture in your head as I read them aloud to you. Who do you see when you hear these rights? It might not be a white person. It may be someone who is well educated. well-dressed, well-financed. But who put it in your head that those were the default for human rights? The right to equality and freedom from discrimination. The right to life, liberty, and personal security. Freedom from torture and degrading treatment. The right to equality before the law. The right to a fair trial. The right to privacy. Freedom of belief and religion. Freedom of opinion. I left these particular rights of the Declaration to the end because I challenge and encourage you to look around and figure out your lane. Are human rights actually for everyone, or do they benefit a select few? If it's the latter, then what do we do to eradicate that? I don't have the answer because it looks different for everyone. I know as a Black queer woman that there is so much work to be done in order to be included as someone protected by these rights. I know that the communities that I inhabit have been doing this since the beginning of time. And I know that I sit at the intersection of these communities, and I have to continue to find ways to bring my communities together and mobilize. But difficult conversations have to be had by all of us to accept that for far too long, oppression, lack of access, lack of resources has pitted marginalized communities against one another. And in order to defeat white supremacy and white exceptionalism, we must come together and change the narrative. I look to people from Audre Lorde to Laverne Cox, queer women of color who have been fighting for human rights for all of us since the beginning of time, and we're still doing so. I look to you as the audience to continue to fight for human rights for all. I am only one human. Yes, I started an organization. Yes, I am proud of the work that it's done, from changing names of pieces of land to engaging different communities. But we as an entirety have to fight together in order to eradicate these injustices. I thank all of you for having me today. If there are any questions, I'd be pleased to take them.
Thank you, Adrienne. That was amazing. So powerful, inspiring. Thank you for speaking truth to us all, sharing parts of your personal story, and also just a snippet of the amazing work you've done, which could take another few hours for you to talk about. So we do have some questions. I'm going to give people a few minutes to just kind of sit with what you talked about and maybe put some more questions into the chat. I have a feeling we won't get to all of them. So to the audience, I apologize if I don't get a chance to bring up your question. But I'm sure you all will be seeing Adrienne again somewhere. She's everywhere. You'll have a chance to ask her some of your questions later on. So I'm going to skip ahead to the most recent one that I just see here. I was really inspired by your words and your testimony. Thank you for taking the time to share these words with us. With all that has been occurring, do you think change will be made for the better once and for all? It just feels like everything is getting, and I think the person got to their word limit there. So you can interpret that however you want to.
So, well, it's getting worse before it gets better. I assume that's part of that question. I do. If we don't have that hope, then we're doomed as a human race. I do think that it will get better. That's all you can live off of sometimes. And I think that you're seeing an entire, like, just spoke to a couple people, there's a new generation of individuals. Just talking to my friends right now, in the last few days in the Asian American community, and hearing their stories and them talking about how traditionally they're not meant to speak up, they're not meant to report things, they're not meant to say anything, and to see them come together and mobilize and start speaking up and putting it out there, you know, the Stop Asian Hate hashtag and other things that are going on. I absolutely do believe that things will get better. We have no other choice as a community but to believe those things. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, and it was worse. I see she added in the second part of the chat. So then connected to that, how can you, let's see, um, what does being an ally look like? And then another question is a little bit connected. How do we get communities of color to stand together? Oftentimes I find us so separated. Thank you, you were awesome. Are we able to contact you outside of this event? So.
Oh yes, you're able to contact me. So yeah, for sure. Okay. First was
How to be an ally,
how to
and
be an
then communities of color.
So to be an ally, because allyship is a wide-ranging thing, right? I that's why I say at the little snippet at the end, pick up your rock. I think that's being an ally. I think that having open ears and open heart and an open mind to differences of others, and being able to take that and not saying, okay, now I'm going to save you, because that does not work. We've dealt with that. That doesn't work. But saying, okay, I'm going to walk next to you and I'm going to listen to you, or I'm going to allow you to take the lead when it comes to whatever community that you're trying to be an ally with, is a great place to start. You don't have to know the answer. You don't have to be mistake free, because I think people think they do. I think you have to recognize and be able to reflect on yourselves and your own biases in order to be an ally. And how do we get of color to come together? I don't have the answer. I know, you know, speaking with different individuals over this past week alone, um, you have to have the difficult conversation. I said something and I said, you know, uh, they did something to communities of color and marginalized communities, the oppressor, and they played the favorite child with each and every one of us to pit us against one another. And here we sit trying to figure out, there's so many more similarities in our oppression, unfortunately, and in our joy, but that we have to come together and work as a force, because there are more of us than them when it comes to the oppressor. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I'm going to go back up to the top. Sorry if I'm jumping around here. You mentioned a couple of them already. Who are some of your role models? I don't know if you had any more that you wanted to mention.
Oh, well, you know, I told Judy, I'm like, I've rewritten this thing multiple times. Things happen, and I'm like, okay, where am I going with this? And you know, I look um to, like I said, Audre Lorde or Laverne Cox, but I also look to a Hillary Clinton, who isn't perfect. She's not the perfect ally. I look to um um uh, Michelle Obama. I look to I'm a lawyer, so I look to a lot of people who have law degrees also. Um, I look to these different communities, Marsha P. Johnson. I look to people within my communities that are working, and then real life people, because those people are out in the stars, right? I look to my friend Mike Keogh. I look to my friend Kamora Harrington, who is an activist, who is a brilliant. I look to people in the world, Brittany Yancey, who's at UConn, who's doing the work and ensuring that, you know, with the Crown Act and those sorts of things. I look to my local legislators. Those are my role models, and people who are around me who can motivate me and inspire me, or who I look to.
Great. Great. I love how you keep bringing human rights back to our local human rights, to our backyard, because that really is where we can all make a difference. So some more plaudits here. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I applaud you with all the work you have done. And then thank you for your work to change the name of the West Hartford Town Green to Unity Green. You referenced that in the work that your organization has done to deal with land, a little bit of land, but maybe you could just briefly summarize what you did. And you did this so quickly. I was just astonished. Summarize it for people who don't know about the work you did.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I met the mayor on the day that we uh, did the flag raising for LGBTQI Pride, and we were having this great conversation, and we were so proud in the moment. And she looks over at me and goes, "And to think that this piece of land is named after a slave owner." And I look back at her, and I always tell people a story. Thank goodness I had on my sunglasses, because I was thinking, not for long. And I immediately went back and wrote, the letter and said, this cannot be. We can't keep celebrating these moments of freedom and equity and equality on this piece of land to someone who, owned slaves. So I wrote, and I was connected to the actual owner of the land, which is the First Church West Hartford, Congregational Church of West Hartford. And they are a church who is looking to be allies, act and be in this work of social justice. And we work together to change this piece of land through conversation and engagement and education. And those things are so vital, to actually have those conversations that we don't want to have. Like I said, you have to have these uncomfortable conversations. This church has been around since the beginning of time of West Hartford. And for someone to walk in and say, hey, I really think we need to change this piece of land's name, and them just to go, I think you're right, but let's go and have this conversation so we can do it, was a beautiful partnership. And I appreciate them and all they've done in their leadership in the community.
And then you have plans for things to happen around this. So everyone who doesn't know where this is, it's that green where the flagpole is at Farmington, and where Main Street intersects with Farmington. Little piece of land there. But so now it's called Unity Green, and you're going to do you'll hold Juneteenth there, right? And then do some other events maybe with QR codes, and you have a lot of ideas I heard about educational events, right?
Yeah.
And community events.
Yeah, so Unity Green, we wanted to make it more than just, it is a small piece of land. So we wanted to make it more than just the land. We wanted to make it a movement throughout our town to inspire others to take a look at our local history and to be a part of the social justice work. So Unity Green will have QR codes and different celebrations on it to speak about the history of West Hartford, to bring voice to those who were voiceless at a certain time in our history, to recognize and acknowledge the individuals who were here before and built this land. And that's that's our foundation and our goal and mission for Unity Green, to ensure that those voices are being heard. And connect it through, there's an MLK mural coming, to connect it to that, and to Juneteenth always, because that's where it really got started for myself and my organization, to connect these different events and these different initiatives to Unity Green, so they recognize that it is for the community, and that Unity Green will uphold those things.
Great. And it'll be a great destination for University of Hartford students to go and learn some things too. I see the bus going down there often, so.
And we are working with actually University of Hartford students, with some first year students, through Professor Chen in the architectural department, and they are doing some stuff for us right now. So we want to make sure we're having community partnerships.
Fantastic. Sure. Great collaboration there. It's wonderful. Then someone's asking, can you talk more about going to the people who control the narrative? You touched on that also. I don't know if you have anything more to add.
Yeah, when I say going to the people who control the narrative, everyone, we all love our Facebook rants and our Twitter rants and all of those things. And I just stopped and said, there are people who have used my voice to vote for, who are controlling the narrative, and some people I didn't vote for. So I need to be in contact with them if I want things changed. And these are the people that we trusted to move us in whatever direction we wanted. We have to go to them and not be shy about it and not feel intimidated by their position. They are representing and working for us at the end of the day. And I feel that, you know, we are traditionally intimidated, you know, they should know what we want. And that's how we've entrusted them. You should know what I want. I voted for you. And you said these are the issues you cared about. But they're just as human as we are. And they, like I said, they do control the narrative because they do have their own bias. They do have their own opinion. They do have their own route that they would like to take in their political lives or their leadership roles. And they need, for us as a community, as constituents, to speak up and to say something if it's hurting our community, or, you know, and not just hurting, but if our community is prospering, because they need that data. If it, and as a flight attendant, the thing we always say, if it's not reported, it didn't happen. And that's how it is. So that's just the same, you know, route I take with our community leaders.
Great. Here's thank you for this. It was amazing. You speak of the hashtag Stop Asian Hate. I wonder what you think about hashtag activism. Is it effective or only a place for performative allyship?
It depends, right? As I wrote last night, I said something to the effect of, it's more than a yard sign and a hashtag. I think Judy saw that also, because it is. You can hashtag anything you want. But if you're just sitting there behind your computer or still scrolling up and down and not doing anything with that hashtag, then it's meaningless. So to be a, you know, I can't say to be a true activist, but again, you have to find your lane. You have to pick up your rock. These are mountains that we are moving. These are mountains, decades and centuries of oppression and racism and sexism and every ism you can think of. And you have to pick up your rock, whatever that may look like. So if you want to hashtag that, make sure you walk outside your door and do something with it. Make sure you're calling the right individuals to have your voice to be heard. Make sure you're learning from the individuals who are doing the work and supporting them in ways, whether through support of the being there or through monetary support, so that these movements can continue.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Here's one. A student is wondering if you have any advice on how to have the hard conversations with people who are not open to diversity, equity, inclusion. That's a really tough one. If you have the answer to this, then you've got it made, right?
Right? No, I don't have the answer. I think that, you know, this is, I was just speaking to someone last night, and we had a great conversation. And I said, child, I'm from the South, honey and vinegar, you know, to have these conversations, you want to meet people at where they are, right? And sometimes that's very frustrating because some people should be further down the road than they are. But to have these conversations, you have to be open, honest, and you have to be willing to listen to their side of the conversation. That's the hardest part, because we all have our opinions, we all have our wants, we all have our goals, but you have to be willing to listen to the other side of that conversation, and then find, it doesn't have to be a compromise, because compromise can be so cringeworthy at times. You have to be able to go, okay, and be quiet and figure out how to sometimes take it in and recognize that you may not change that person in the way that you thought you would. But if they listen to you in the way that you listen to them, hopefully they will take your words and do some work themselves.
A person is wondering if you spoke, when I introduced you, I spoke about how you said you found racism in the North as well as in the South, and what differences in behavior did you notice, if any, between the North and the South? Is the racism different? Does it look different? Or I mean, we all have our own notions of what that means, but I don't know how true it is.
It's blatant in the South, and there's plenty, you know, of Black folks that continue to stay in the South, and maybe I could have made it in the South had I not chosen to um, have a child that would who had to deal with not only racism but also having two mothers, maybe we would have been fine. And like I said, in that portion also, I could have probably ignored my trauma and oppression because I would have just been living a life of whatever means. But in the North, it's, if you really want to know, look at your legislation, look at stuff on the books, look at the lines of your town, look at the communities within your town, and you'll start to see what racism truly is. It doesn't have to be overt, it can be covert in ways that a lot of us don't look at or recognize. Um, and you'll see it for sure. It's just different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of work to be done everywhere,
Yeah.
right? Someone asked if this is being recorded, and yes, it will be. It is being recorded, and we will make the link available to anyone else who would like to watch it. Thank you to Adrienne; she was gracious enough to agree to that. Um, let me see if there's. Again, thank you for sharing your inspiring words and personal experiences. Yeah, any events, milestones in recent years that make you feel that progress is being made and leave you hopeful? And then I'm just going to give you one other one. So a lot of these questions overlap, obviously, and you've touched on a lot of them in different ways. But there's this one, any events, milestones that make you feel hopeful. And then also people are asking, like, how do you keep going? You know, where do you, and it's true, you have so much energy, both emotionally and then physically. Like, just how do you just keep going when things do look so grim sometimes?
A lot of, I can speak locally, but I'll speak nationally. Stacey Abrams et al. Keeps you going. Um, Georgia keeps you going. Watching different states start to turn, and this is very political of me to say, purple, keep you going, because you see that voices are starting to be heard. People are starting to fight for their rights. Different communities are speaking up that traditionally have not. And those are the things that keep me hopeful, and those are the things that keep me going. Being exhausted is a thing, right? If you listen to any Black woman speak on it, we all speak about being exhausted because we are. There's a lot of work that's being done there. There's the hashtag trust Black women and this, that, and the other, and that in itself is exhausting. um, I love that you trust Black women, and you should trust Black women. We've learned that, but it becomes heavy on our shoulders. But at the same time, the work has to be done. Our ancestors forged a way for us, and I don't have any other choice in it. And I think once you recognize that you're in this world and you're in this moment and you're in this movement, you have to keep fighting through exhaustion, through emotionally and physically, because you want to bring others along to help you. So as long as I continue to bring one more person along and have one more person to believe in the movement, um, I'm rejuvenated and revitalized every day just from a simple like of a post, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now I'm going to change the subject a little bit. My privilege as moderator here, and connected to UHeart's recent basketball victory. So many of you probably don't know Adrienne was a star basketball player in college. And I don't know if you want to touch on human rights and being a female, like a female basketball player or of color, queer, I mean, any of those things that might intersect with human rights and your experience in the athletic world. I think a lot of our audience would be interested in hearing about your thoughts on that. And then what do you think University of Hartford's chances are? No, just kidding.
Well, one, go U of Hart, go UConn, go University of Central Florida, where I'm from. Um, I being an athlete, you are at an intersection also, right? Growing up, I played in the early 2000s where being out wasn't exactly allowed, not by players, not by coaches, and I've seen that progress in that world of queerness that's able to be seen in the profession and in the sport. And then as far as seeing, uh, I'm so inspired by seeing more Black coaches, more coaches of color in general, who have contributed to all of these programs, who are now in a place to lead these programs to greatness. Um, and I also see a movement, and I hope it becomes more of a positive movement of accepting um, um, trans individuals into the athletic world, um, because um, I am an ally of trans athletes. I believe they deserve a chance to compete in whatever way that they see fit. And there's constantly an argument about trans athletes and drugs, hormone therapy, and this, and someone just saying they want to be female or male one day. And if you are in the community, you know that's just not true. And also, when you say that, you also show your privilege, because these athletes who are competing with their full heart and their full self, not everyone has the access to healthcare. That again, a human right. Not everyone has access to hormone therapy uh, or anything of that sort. So you have to check yourselves when you guys are going around and saying those sorts of things. And you have to recognize, especially with our youth, these are children who didn't make that choice. Um, and they just want to compete and they want to be a part of something. Being queer and being a queer athlete of color is isolating in itself. Um, and to be further isolated does nothing but continue to lead them toward different avenues of us, depression, suicide, and death. So I encourage you to really think about that when you're thinking about athletics, and individuals in sport.
Thank you.
Okay.
One last question, and then I think we'll wrap it up. Has there been any conversation about changing street names in West Hartford? Many are named after slaveholders as well, and we also have many named after, Indian, Native American tribes, and yeah.
Yeah, actually,
On the commission, the Human Rights Commission, I don't know if there's been any talk of that.
actually, just through other different partnerships with Tracy Wilson and the town and whatnot. Yeah, we've talked about renaming streets and kind of keeping it moving, because as you said, there are plenty of names with slaveholders, names on them that someone else deserves to be recognized in those. So be on the lookout for street names.
That's going to be interesting. People get very attached to
Absolutely.
their street identities. So, all right. Well, thank you, Adrienne, so much for coming to our community at University of Hartford. Thank you to the university's Office of Diversity and Community Engagement and the Interdisciplinary Studies. Thank you to all of you in the audience for coming today. And we're going to say goodbye. We will send out, I hope, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn here, but hopefully we'll send all of you the link, or it'll be posted somewhere if any of you want to have access to the recording, and also contact information for Adrienne. But you can always just Google Concerned Parents of Color of West Hartford, or Google her name. You'll find contact information there. So with that, I say goodbye to everybody. Thank you again. Thank you, Adrienne. So much. And then for this last slide here is an upcoming, it's not Women's History Month related, but a very important series that we have at University of Hartford, the Rogo Distinguished Visiting Lecture Series. So coming up on Thursday, March 25th. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.